Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to review the new She Talks Silence album, Sorry, I Am Not. She Talks Silence is the solo project of Miss Yamaguchi Minami, though it was formerly a duo with Kawai Ami from Prince Graves, which is also a solo project. They've split ways, and I really loved Prince Graves' last album that just came out recently. It's one of my favorite albums of the year so far. And so I was definitely interested and looking forward to this new She Talks Silence record, even though I haven't really listened to any of their past stuff. Until very recently, I did pick up their past two albums. But I was definitely just intrigued to see how this connected with Prince Graves' new album that I really loved. And there are definitely some similarities and some differences. There's a lot of kind of spacey, reverby guitars on here that definitely sound like something that Prince Graves might do. But there's also a bit more of a lo-fi and noisy edge to it that Prince Graves wasn't really experimenting with. This thing kicks off with the title track, Sorry, I Am Not, which is a soft and understated track, but it still manages to have a surprising amount of kind of quiet energy within it. We get some electronic drums and some very whispery, soft vocals over top of some reverby and spacey guitars. When the second guitar part comes in, it's really kind of dissonant, and it rubs against the existing guitar part in a very interesting and kind of crunchy way. But it's still faint and soft enough to not really disrupt the kind of vamping, repetitive harmony that's going on. And I actually really like this use of dissonance in the track. The song gets a little bit more typical on the chorus, where we just get some strummed guitar chords over top of a fairly poppy, though still soft and kind of melancholy melody. This song is short and sweet, but this song is really short and to the point, but has a very interesting kind of energy and charisma to it. The next track, More Anti-Yourself, has a bit more of that psychedelic flavor that reminds me a little bit of Prince Graves' new album. We get some really spacey kind of soundscapes with layered, echoey, and reverby vocals, a kind of cavernous electronic drum beat that's very distant in the background. And the chorus just has this kind of unsettling eeriness to it that I find really compelling. I think this is probably one of my favorite tracks on the album. The album then takes a turn for a bit more of a typical indie rock, indie pop style on the third track, Walk Away. This song is a bit more poppy and a bit more straightforward, but still has a little bit of a weird edge to it with Yamaguchi Minami's extremely soft, almost whispered vocals that seem really kind of standoffish when compared to the directness of the rest of the track. It feels like the band is kind of front and center performing this track, and then she's kind of off to the side, just kind of chiming in on this one. It's a decent track and is one of the more interesting tracks on the poppier side on here, but generally I'm not a huge fan of when she goes for this more indie rock, indie pop aesthetic. Like on track 6, Holy Hands, Holy Voices, which just comes off as really uninteresting when compared to a lot of the tracks that surround it. And it doesn't have the punch and energy to make it just a fun pop song. The electronic drums sound really stiff and kind of lifeless on this song, and at this point in the album, I'm getting a little bit tired of the whispery, soft, breathy, high-pitched vocal approach that's taken all over this album. I think she pulls it off a little bit better on track 8, Rosie, however, which is just a bit more punchy and has a stronger mix and some just stronger, catchier melodies to carry it forward. But I really think She Talks Silence is at her strongest when she's doing something that's a bit darker, a bit more experimental, like on the track Just Like War. This song has some very echoey vocals and a kind of dark guitar line that just repeats throughout really the whole song. It comes off as almost like a really short post-punk track in the way that it just kind of rides on this rather simple, kind of dark sounding groove for a really long time and just builds it. And I say a long time, the song's like 3 minutes long, but you know what I mean. There's also a really interesting moment at the halfway point on this album, track 5, called There's No, which is this lo-fi noise rock track with a little bit of a punk edge that almost sounds like it was recorded with like a cell phone at a live show. There's tons of feedback and noise all over this thing. It's super distorted, and you can barely hear any of the vocals. They're just buried under the kind of distorted guitars that cover the track. And the song's really noisy, but unless I turn it up really loud, it doesn't have a huge amount of impact. And that's something that pops up a few points on this album. The mix just isn't super punchy at times. I mean, you can crank it up really loud to make up for that, but there's a lot of tracks on here where I feel like the mix just is a little limp. Like for the track Long Ways, for example, which, while it finishes with some heavier and more punchier drums and distorted guitars that I like, and gets a bit shoegazy, the whole first half of the track is really kind of weak and lacks impact for me. I'm also a little lukewarm on the closer track, The Moon. The song is really spacey and reverby and super kind of atmospheric. Whoops. But the electronic drum kit on this thing just sounds super stiff and lifeless and boring. And while I do like the heavier, more shoegazy parts of the song, I think the production really is kind of meh on the track, and I think it could have been more than it is. Overall, I'm liking this album fairly well. I especially like the first half of it. The first 4 or 5 tracks I think are really solid, but the latter half of the album falls a little bit flat for me. It's a little weak. But if you don't mind super soft, breathy vocals throughout the whole thing, and you're looking for some kind of spacey, arty pop music to listen to, this might be worth your time. I'm feeling a 6.5 on this album. It's solid. You know, it's an enjoyable listen. I had a good time reviewing it. But there are just some disappointing moments and some areas that really lacked impact, and I feel like could have been a lot more than they are. But overall, I think it's an alright album, and if you enjoy the stuff on here, definitely check out the new Prince Graves album. That's a little bit more of a higher production value thing. But not overproduced or anything like that. It's a very solid album. So yeah, that's me. This was the new She Talks Silence record. It's called Sorry, I Am Not. And it's alright. I'm not crazy about it, but there are definitely some interesting ideas on here and some cool experimentation that happens. And if you want to preview a bit of this album, there is a link in the description as usual. And I will see you guys next week for another review. It's going to be a good one. Peace.